Installment 9. The day that the Earth's rotation reversed. It started slowly, unnoticed at first. Shadows fell the wrong way across sidewalks, the sun lingered too long in one corner of the sky, and the familiar rhythm of buses, trains, and streetlights felt delayed. People kept walking their usual paths, checking phones, chatting with friends, moving exactly as they always had, oblivious to the subtle shift around them. I watched from a corner where the light hit differently, where the buildings seemed slightly tilted, and waited. Everything repeated as it always had, yet nothing aligned the same way. Leaves on the trees twitched in opposition to the wind. Garbage cans toppled sideways before anyone passed by. Every routine continued, stubbornly, faithfully, even though the world itself had begun to move against them. By evening, some noticed the change. The sun dipped in a strange trajectory, the horizon reversed, and for a moment, everyone hesitated. But humans are persistent creatures. They returned to their routines, bus stops, crosswalks, corner cafes, believing the world was still right, even as the sky had already betrayed them. I followed those who adjusted first, those who abandoned paths or extended their walks, curious about how repetition now bent in opposition to the world itself. And the strange truth became clear: patterns mattered more than order. The streets, the sidewalks, the lighted corners, they kept track of steps, timing, and attention. The humans didn't know it, but the city had already adapted, learning new routines from their resistance. By nightfall, the rotation itself seemed irrelevant. The sun moved differently, shadows fled in impossible directions, and yet the city's rhythm, stubborn and attentive, maintained its silent observation. Nothing chased anyone, nothing harmed them. The only consequence was awareness, the sense that even when the world reverses, the patterns we leave behind remain, and some presences, quiet, patient, eternal, never miss a step. Installment 10. The president who woke up no longer president. He woke up to a city that still functioned, but no one recognized him as they once had. The streets moved like they always did. Deliveries arrived, commuters shuffled through crosswalks, streetlights flickered in their steady rhythm, but when he stepped outside, the usual deference was gone. Doors opened for him only because they always had. The offices he once occupied were filled with strangers. Everything repeated itself, yet the repetition no longer included him. He tried to reclaim routines, walking the same corridors, attending the same meetings, issuing the same orders, but the world adjusted silently around him. Staffers passed by as though he were a shadow, guards ignored him, and public attention flowed elsewhere, like water that had shifted its course. He was present, aware, still moving, but the rhythm no longer belonged to him. At first he panicked, then he observed. The city, the people, the offices, they maintained order, unaffected by his absence of recognition. Everything functioned because patterns persisted, and no one questioned why a leader could vanish from memory without the world faltering. His influence was irrelevant, only routines mattered. By night, he had stopped trying. He walked familiar streets, took familiar trains, entered familiar buildings. He existed alongside the city's movement, silent and invisible, a presence maintained not by power, authority, or fear, but by attention. The humans kept walking their predictable paths, unaware that one of their usual centers of authority had become a ghost, and that some presences, whether noticed or ignored, always remained quietly between stops. Things seen between stops, Season 1 finale, the night when the stops overlapped. The city had always moved like clockwork, streetlights blinking in silent rhythm, bus doors opening at the same intervals, and apartment doors closing in predictable sequence, but that night, the patterns began to touch one another. At a quiet corner on the west side, the man in the sad suit waited under a flickering streetlight, still impatient, noting the steps of pedestrians who had once passed without pause. Across the street, the janitor swept a hallway in a building no one would enter until morning, his movements slightly altered, as if he had sensed a subtle shift in the rhythm of the city. The library on the other block seemed quieter than usual, yet the librarian who never checked out noticed the absence of familiar footsteps, and the ledger remained blank, waiting for names that were no longer repeated in the order they had been before. The apartment on 13th Street hummed faintly, doors and windows catching faint reflections of the streetlight outside, as if the building itself had acknowledged that something was stirring. The chef rearranged desserts in the restaurant he had long tended, adjusting each tray with care, while a faint scuttle sounded in the kitchen, reminding him of the exterminator's long-forgotten roach that had learned to move at its own pace. On the edges of the city, the zombie-watched humans shuffled their routines as usual, their predictable patterns forming corridors in which he drifted silently, unaware that the world had begun to fold differently around them. And high above, the president who woke up no longer president moved among the crowds, invisible yet still counted in the city's rhythm, part of the pattern even as recognition had abandoned him. Something was happening, though no one could name it. The stops, the corners, the hallways, the streets, they had begun to overlap, brushing against one another in ways unnoticed during ordinary routines. Figures who had once existed in isolation now shared fragments of space and time, their presences brushing edges, echoes meeting echoes, shadows overlapping shadows. Yet no one acknowledged it, the city carried on as it always did, each human step reinforcing the pulse, each repeated routine keeping the emergent pattern intact. And somewhere beyond the sight of these figures, beyond the perception of ordinary routines, a new movement began, quiet, patient, aware. Something that would not wait for schedules or repetition, something that would notice the overlaps and follow the rhythm more closely than anyone had ever been watched before. The city exhaled in the dark. Nothing moved too fast. Nothing acted with intention. Yet the pattern had changed forever. And as humans returned to their stops, their apartments, their libraries, their streets, they did so unaware that the presences they had glimpsed, felt, or ignored had begun to align themselves, preparing for the next sequence, the next story, the next season.